I'm just going to put it in the
I'm
trash.
curious. You said when you serve me with papers, I don't have a right to
Oh,
ask
the one out here in the
questions?
garage.
It's unplugged.
He unplugged it, yeah. All
Steve,
the stuff in the freezer's gone.
Steve, you just said I don't have a right to ask questions of the people that are filing plaintiff complaints on me?
Serving papers is what I said.
But you said I don't have a right to ask questions. How can that possibly
Of the
be?
paper server?
Well, you're
the process server?
you're the plaintiff and I'm the
And
defendant.
I'm the landlord for those papers that I served you.
Oh, you're claiming to be the landlord?
Landlord's agent.
Actually, landlord's agent, are you saying? Boy, they're really confused, aren't they?
You destroy all my food and stuff like that.
How did I destroy your food?
You're such a damn idiot.
How did I destroy your
You
food?
unplugged the freezer.
I'm not aware of that.
Well, it's unplugged, so...
Which freezer are you talking about?
This fridge out here and that.
Well, let me go check that because you realize that's perjury if you're lying.
By the way, when did you
There's
unplug
been-
the freezer?
I was not aware of that. Who said I unplugged the freezer?
Well, I assume that you're the one. I assume that you're the one that unplugged the garage door opener.
Oh, well then that was an honest.
and the
you
freezer.
you realize that's an honest mistake.
It probably is. I've asked you, when did that happen?
Do you realize when I unplugged the garage door because you've been harassing me for the last year and I'm trying to block myself?
When did you unplug it? I just want to know so I can know if I can save the stuff in the freezer.
It was like 18 hours ago.
18 hours ago. Yeah, I'll have to check on that side.
But you understand the difference between an honest mistake and mens rea, right? Do you know what mens rea is?
I understand the honest mistake. I just know that you did it.
But-
so that's all.
But what you're doing, Steve, is not an honest mistake. You said I have no right to ask questions, and that's not an honest mistake.
Okay. Then that's an honest mistake, but doesn't matter.
Okay, if you wanna recant, I'm willing to do that. But you need to actually say it was a mistake like I did the refrigerator, don't you? You can't give forgiveness and be an honest mistake.
Forgiveness.
Well-
I want you out.
That basically, you can't make an honest mistake if you're not willing to admit you did it.
Oh, I see.
You do realize you're on video and you said, I have no right to ask questions and
As far as I know, you don't.
You're,
As far as I know, I don't know the law. You actually do know more law than I do.
okay, but then,
I don't know law.
then,
I have lawyers, but they don't tell me everything.
so you're basically saying you're giving advice to mom that I don't have a right to ask questions, and at the same time on video admitting you don't know if you're making mistakes. See, here's where
point.
here's
Okay.
where the real interesting stuff starts, Steve. How can you be sure Mom and Debbie did not murder my father? That's an honest question I'm going to ask in court, Steve. I'm asking you, how can you be sure you're not making an honest mistake?
Get out of this room.
But you just said.
Get out of this room.
Hey, look,
Get
I've
out of
got
this
you
room.
on video. This is
Get
domestic
out of
violence.
this room.
Wow, I can't
Get out
believe
of
you
this
did
room.
that.
Get out of this room.
You come in. Oh, wow. Did you know slamming a door is domestic violence? Steve's kind of getting scared now, Mom. I asked him, I made an honest mistake with the refrigerator, and he realizes that's true. And I asked him, when he said I have no right to ask questions, how does he know I don't have a right? And he said he doesn't know. He said on video, I'm a better lawyer and know the law better. That's kind of serious stuff, Mom. And I asked him, how does he know that you and Debbie didn't murder Dad? That might be an honest mistake. And he got scared and slammed the door.
I know damn well we didn't.
How do you know that?
Because they did the test on him when he did die in that. All you did was run off to Chehalis to some girl or something, and that you didn't even hang.
So you're the officer doing the probable cause investigation. Your name is on video. You're saying it's not a crime for Steve to threaten me with bodily threat and say I have no right to ask questions. And then he turned around on video and, unlike you, said, well, I guess I'm better at law than him. Maybe he made a mistake.
He did
So
not
it's
make a threat to you. He stood close to you and told you.
actually,
So that's not a threat.
he said
That's-
he got
that's
between me. Actually, sir, I've showed you that the plaintiff in this case is F. Beverly Donahoe.
Yes.
And I explained to you, he is not the landlord, neither's my sister, and they have no business.
They're invited guests here by their mom.
They're not invited in the lawsuit.
I don't deal with lawsuits. That's
Well,
not my
I
job.
do all the time.
Good job.
And you said I have no right to ask questions, right?
I said you have a right to ask questions about.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That was an
You can
honest
ask-
mistake.
You can ask your mom questions for sure.
So, okay, thank you. That was my legal premise, that when I'm served with a false report that says I'm behind and they're saying I'm evicted, but I have bank proof that says I'm way ahead of payment schedule, it's actually a crime to file false reports like that in court. And then it's further a crime if I, as the defendant, need to go ask the plaintiff, which is Beverly, how can you lie and say I'm behind when I've actually been paying over $1,000 for 11 months, so I'm actually ahead of schedule.
So, sir, real quick, can I talk? So, you can bring that evidence of those payments into the court and prove that you are ahead on schedule, and then
Yes.
they'll make a determination on that.
But the 911 call I made was, I have a right to ask questions, and I have a video of you saying I have that right.
You can ask her questions. Yes.
And I have
You're
a
an
video.
adult.
I have
She's
a
your mom.
video
You
of
can
Steve
ask her
saying I
questions.
don't have a right, and he threatened me with bodily violence. Do you
What
realize
did
that?
He threaten you? How did he threaten you with bodily violence?
His size, he got a, like you and I, you're his supervisor, right? You can see we're having an intelligent discussion about, am I being charged falsely or not? And we're like, what, 3-4 feet away?
Yeah.
But if I went up right now and asked my mom questions, neither one of you would come up this close to me and say, get away, you can't ask questions. But I have him on video doing that. That's a crime. That's
No,
domestic
it's not.
violence.
No, it's
And I've actually researched it.
Well,
You have
actually,
to.
It's my job to do this. So
Well,
I-
actually, apparently, you don't really do a lot of question asking. I've noticed you assume a lot of things, like when I asked my brother-in-law, how could he be sure my mom and sister didn't murder my dad? I have him on video saying he's not sure. And that's part of why she freaked out. That's why they've been abusing me for 10 years, is 10 years ago, I started saying that I was going to finally tell the world that my mom and dad had a problem in 1976, and she freaked out just like she did with me and tried to blind me with chemicals, but in his case, he murdered her. It murdered him. So I'm just not sure that any of you have done any probable cause investigation. You just basically...
All right, so I understand that I'm a little late to the game because I wasn't here before, right?
Right.
So here's what I know at this time. You've been served with some eviction paperwork, right?
Right. So
Okay. So understanding that you may dispute the allegations of being behind on payment and stuff like that.
Right.
You absolutely have the right to dispute that.
Yes.
However, the paperwork is still official, has been served to you, and it's a legal
No,
process.
actually, if you notice, this
Hold
is
on.
this is
So,
not official.
Just listen, please.
So listen.
No,
Okay.
actually, you need to see it's not official. It's not a
Are you
court.
going to listen to me?
Okay, I just
Okay.
wanted to know if you were going to listen to me.
Okay. I will. I have been listening to you, and I will continue listening to you if you're going to allow us to have a conversation. Right?
Sure,
So I'm trying to explain to you the basics of what I understand. Okay.
sure.
You've been served with paperwork to say that you're going to be evicted, right?
Not court paperwork. No,
It doesn't have to be court paperwork.
actually, it does, sir.
Okay. No. So listen, when it comes down to the civil issue or the civil renters agreement or however it is that you guys have determined for the eviction, all right? And if you fail to abide by that process, then they take the next step, which is all a civil landlord-tenant act, which I am not a master of. All
I
right?
am.
At some point, then they would give you the legal, whatever court ordered saying you are forced to be evicted or you're forced to get out. All right?
Do you read? Are you able to read what they said? It says.
Sir?
It says you
Sir?
have to be out in 3 days.
Okay.
No, it's a 3 notice to pay the rent. If you would read that, it just says that you have to pay your back pay.
So either which way.
But you realize this is not official paperwork, right?
Either which way, here's what's important, okay? The important factor is this right here is a civil dispute with you guys at this point in time, okay? This whole eviction process.
Unless I get bodily threatened.
We don't deal with the civil dispute based on what you describe as your allegation of some sort of bodily threatened. I don't hear any probable cause for a crime, okay?
So if you I guess I explained this to him,
And I
but
was listening to it as well.
so you saw that the landlord is Beverly. You saw that,
That's the owner of the property.
and you saw that Steve is claiming to be the landlord.
Again,
Civil matter.
this is a big civil matter that
Well,
doesn't involve law enforcement.
So why is he
okay?
here? I'm asking you, why in the hell is Steve and Debbie here if the landlord is the one serving me papers?
Kevin, they are invited guests by your mom. Beverly is their mom too.
But
they are invited guests
guess
by the owner of the house.
When
So
the
they're allowed to be here.
landlord
We've already explained that.
yeah, but you
Okay.
admitted you're not experts at tenant law, and I am. Are you aware of that?
But if someone is an invited guest in a house, apartment, any residence, by the
They
owner,
can't.
they can be here.
They can't threaten the person who's supposed to be here to ask.
Okay,
They
we've
can't
already
ask
investigated
questions.
the threat, and that's not anything that would go to probable cause of criminal harassment.
So you don't want to see the video of him coming
show
up
me
and
the video.
saying I
You can show
can't
me the
ask
video.
questions?
You can show me the video. Yes, please show me the video.
Okay, let me play it for you. So you're saying I went to Chehalis when I went to my first wife, Sherry, and said, why did they murder my dad? I guess you don't have your story straight, Mom.
Nobody murdered your dad.
You murdered him
He
and
died
Debbie.
from the kidney disease.
No, Mom. You have what's called Mens Rea. And when you threatened to blind me the other day with chemicals that are used for cleaning, that showed you have Mens Rea. One last video deposition, Steve. When I first came here, Beverly said you didn't want me living here because I'm a violent person. Is that right, Steve? Are you aware I have professionals, alternative professional consulting that says you were a liar and you slandered me?
Slandered you.
Yes, if you say to someone that basically they're violent, but the professional says I can be provoked, but I'm not violence oriented. Are you aware that when you poisoned Beverly's mind and got her to take me out of the will, that invalidated then her power of attorney?
To my knowledge, she hasn't taken you out of the will yet.
Oh, well, now,
Yeah.
actually, Steve, that is very interesting. Beverly, Steve says you have not taken me out of the will yet, and I actually was understanding that you did.
Would you back up?
Actually,
Back up,
I
please.
have a right to do
Back up,
video
please.
deposition. Actually,
This is not a deposition.
Actually, it is a deposition. I caught you in a lie.
Okay.
Basically, Beverly has taken me out of the will because you poisoned her mind and said I'm violent, but you're not a professional. And basically, I have a right to ask her questions. Beverly,
He doesn't want to talk to you
did
right
you
now.
take me out of
How
the
about
will,
another
yes or
time?
no?
You cannot You cannot get any of the housing on that.
Yes, that's what I told Steve, but he said he didn't know.
Yeah.
He said he didn't know that you told me. He said, and Debbie said, I'm violent, but really they're lying. They're not professionals. So they poisoned your mind and they
You're
deceived
violent,
you.
all right.
Oh, really? Why?
The other day, every time you want to show off, you start screaming and yelling and carrying on something terrible. So
No, actually, you're hard of hearing. When I speak low, you don't hear me, so you say speak up. And then when I speak up, you say don't speak loud. So it's kind of confusing, really. But you know that I showed you that alternative professional counseling said I am not violence oriented, but I can be provoked. Like, for instance, 10 years of false accusations by you and Steve and Debbie that I am violent.
yeah.
You do realize what slander is, and that's why I sued you, right?
Get the hell downstairs and shut your mouth.
Actually, I have a right to do depositions of people who are filing false accusations. You seem to skip due process all the time. I guess you just enjoy being a criminal. You don't actually know what due process is, do you?
Which one is this one? Okay.
Do you know what due process is, Steve Borchers?
Kevin,
No, actually, I have a right to interrogate the people on video and present this to the judge.
you don't even have a right to be in here. So
Actually, Mom, I think what happened is you made one of those goofy errors where they said I'm 3 months in behind, and they actually served papers, but actually I've been paying $1,200 a month for over a year. So I'm, according to their papers, I'm actually prepaid. Do you know that? I'm like prepaid for another year.
you didn't pay anything in August and September, and you.
Well, actually, if you listen to Debbie and Steve, they've served me that I owe $400, but you know for a fact that I've been paying you like $1,200 or at least over $1,000. So I guess they goofed up because according to their own documents, I'm ahead of payment, not behind.
As part of it was supposed to be on food. Part of it was for having the
Well, actually, so you're aware that they said I have no right to ask questions. Is that right?
Excuse me.
We can check with you later. Take care.
Thank you.
So, what is your position? I have a right to ask questions on the paperwork, or I don't? You seem to go two ways. You say you filed paper, and the officer said I have a right to ask questions.
You can ask all you want, Kevin.
But a moment ago, you said I don't have a right to ask questions. So, when do I get to ask questions? And who is the plaintiff? The paperwork shows Beverly, but apparently Steve says he's the plaintiff. When you file the paperwork,
You have the paperwork, Kevin. Thank you.
No, actually, I don't have legal paperwork. You said you're going to file it Monday. I have a right to know who will be the plaintiff.
Doing the bills.
Yeah.
Oh, good. She didn't do anything with that.
Do you know that your husband is on video coming up 3 inches from me and physically saying I have no right to ask questions? But you just said I have a right, and so did the officer. So your husband is guilty of domestic violence.
Right? Yeah.
Actually, domestic violence and elder abuse is not a funny thing.
No, it's not. Thank
You're
you.
correct.
When you have it on video, like I have Steve saying I have no right to ask mom questions, but yet Debbie says I have a right, and the officers have a right.
Would
And
you please go back downstairs?
no, I live here. Why would I need to do that?
You're harassing us, Kevin.
Oh, okay. We're on video.
Excellent.
Explain.
Thank you.
You said I have a right to ask questions. The officer said I have a right. How is asking questions about a false report that I'm behind on harassing? That's actually a false report. That's a crime. Are you aware of that? So
Okay.
exactly who will be the plaintiff, because I have a right to ask questions. Steve said he's the landlord, but the paper shows it's Beverly. So who will be the plaintiff on this false accusation? Now the officer said I have a right. You said I have a right, Debbie, on video.
I have a right not to answer your questions, Kevin. Thank you.
Well, only if you believe you can file paperwork and then not explain yourself, but that makes no sense. You're the one filing paperwork. Why can't I ask you questions?
You can ask anything you want.
Okay.
You can ask.
Then when do I get to ask?
I'm not going to answer.
Steve.
But
Steve.
No?
according to Debbie,
All right.
she said there's no agreement on Landlord-Tenant Act. Is that right? Yes or no?
Do you see Mom, Steve?
I thought I did.
That's a legitimate question. It's not harassment. When Debbie handed the paperwork today, it said Beverly is filing
There it is.
as the plaintiff, and Debbie said there's no agreement between us. So what is the story? That's a legitimate question.
You got paper clips maybe?
Yeah, no. It's
Now, will Beverly be filing her own paperwork? You claim to be filing paperwork for Debbie, right? I mean, for Beverly, using the power of attorney.
it goes in that box.
If you're the one filing the paperwork, you're her attorney, right? Which one? Steve says he's her attorney. Debbie says she's her attorney. Don't I have a right to see your power of attorney?
No.
Well, how can that be if you're the one filing paperwork? I have a right.
Put that damn phone thing down.
Actually, Mom, the officer said I have a right to ask questions on the person who's filing false reports, and apparently it has your name on it, so I have a right to ask why you're filing false reports on me. You threatened to file false reports when I started suing you, and now you're doing it, so it's kind of like you're hanging yourself, and so are Steve and Debbie, because I tried to tell you filing false reports is a crime. But the officer said I have a right to ask questions, and Steve threatened me with bodily harm and said I don't have a right to ask questions. That's not the same as what the officer said. Anybody knows if somebody's filing a complaint, you have a right to ask questions.
Excuse me.
I didn't fill out the form there.
Oh, we can do that later.
Mom, according to Debbie and Steve,
Ready to go to the grocery store?
you have a power of attorney, and that's why they're filing paperwork. Don't I have a right to see a copy of that? Because I'm claiming they did it without a proper way of getting a power of attorney.
Have your purse.
What did you just say?
Let's just go.
I said, don't I have a right, if Debbie and Steve are going to file paperwork and be your attorney, don't I have a right to get a copy of the paperwork you gave them?
Sure now.
You do remember the Department of Corrections diagnosed you 4 years ago as non-functional. That means you should have been in a nursing home 4 years ago, right?
You're nuts.
No, actually, the Department of Corrections came here and said the house smells. It's a hazard to live here.
Bye.
Are you aware of that, Steve? 4 years ago?
I remember the stupid woman that said it too.
Come on, Mom.
Oh, okay.
Let's just go.
So there you go. You remember the Department of Corrections diagnosed you mentally ill 4 years ago then. They said it's non-functional, you hoard stuff, and that's why you're violent, you're mentally ill. You should have been in a nursing home 4 years ago. Can you explain that, Debbie? Why wasn't Mom put in a nursing home 4 years ago?
Bye.
That's a legitimate question. You're filing claims on me that are false. I have a right to ask truthful questions.
I'm shutting the door now. Please don't have your face there.